They called me dead weight, until I showed them who paid for their entire life. True story. Have you ever felt truly invisible in your own life, even to the people who are supposed to love you most? Have you poured your heart and soul, your very essence, into nurturing a family, only to find yourself systematically erased from their story? I have. I watched the child I devoted my life to cast me aside for the person they married. I saw it happen, slowly, painfully, over years. My son, the boy I raised, the man I loved unconditionally, stood by while his wife, my daughter-in-law, systematically chipped away at my dignity, my self-worth, and eventually, my very place in their lives. He watched as she orchestrated my quiet banishment, not just from their home, but from the narrative of their success, a narrative I had silently, secretly, single-handedly written. But they didn't know I would be the one to write the final chapter of their story. The day everything came crashing down for them, though they thought it was their triumph, began like any other meticulously curated event Thorn, my daughter-in-law, orchestrated. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air held a promise of winter, yet the last vestiges of golden light clung to the turning leaves. The scent of expensive perfume, freshly cut flowers, and the subtle, cloying aroma of new money hung heavy in the air, almost tangible. Their sprawling estate, a monument to their supposed achievements, glowed under the warm embrace of strategically placed uplighting. Every window, every polished surface, reflected the opulence Thorn so desperately craved, a reflection of a life she insisted they had built from the ground up, brick by laborious brick. I knew better, of course. The grand ballroom, which had once been a quiet, elegant library filled with the scent of aged paper and leather before Thorn declared it too stuffy, was now transformed into a glittering cavern. Crystal chandeliers, heavy and ornate, cascaded light onto velvet drapes of deep sapphire and gold. It was a space designed to impress, to overwhelm, to declare their arrival in the upper echelons of society. Guests, a meticulously vetted collection of local dignitaries, wealthy business associates, and social climbers, mingled with champagne flutes in hand, their laughter echoing a little too loudly in the cavernous space, a thin, brittle sound that seemed to bounce off the polished marble floors. I heard snippets of their conversations, hushed compliments about Thorn's impeccable taste, the stunning transformation of the house, the meteoric rise of Thorn Industries. I simply observed, a quiet sentinel in the corner. I was there, of course. My presence was a non-negotiable part of Thorn's grand pronouncements, a necessary prop in her tableau of the generous, successful family. Tucked away in a corner near the back, by a large potted palm that seemed designed to obscure me, I blended into the background as if I were merely part of the decor. Thorn had positioned me there, I knew, not out of affection, but to complete her carefully constructed image, a subtle reminder to her audience that even the quiet, unassuming mother-in-law, seemingly dependent and grateful, was well taken care of by their magnanimity. I wore the same simple, well-maintained dress I'd worn to countless family gatherings, a quiet contrast to the sparkling gowns and tailored suits that swished past me like a parade of peacocks. My hands, still capable despite their age, rested in my lap, betraying none of the tremor that had started deep within my core, a tremor of apprehension mixed with a cold certainty of what was to come. The buzz in the room quieted as Thorn, radiant and imperious in a shimmering sapphire gown that seemed to absorb all the light, tapped a delicate silver microphone. The fabric of her dress shimmered with every slight movement, catching the light like liquid jewels, a physical embodiment of the wealth she now possessed and flaunted. She stood on a small, elevated platform at the front of the room, flanked by my son, Lorian. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his tie a little too tight, his smile a little too fixed, a brittle thing that didn't reach his eyes. He was handsome, my boy, tall and broad-shouldered, but his eyes, when they occasionally darted towards me, were clouded with a familiar guilt I had grown to recognize over the years, a silent apology he never voiced, never acted upon. My dearest friends, esteemed colleagues, and beloved family. Thorn's voice, amplified by the sound system, cut through the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. It was a voice she had cultivated over the years, one that was sweet and charming on the surface, designed to disarm, but with an underlying steel that could flay you alive, a whip of command that brooked no dissent. Welcome to our annual celebration of gratitude and achievement." She gestured expansively around the room, her arms sweeping in a wide arc, as if she had personally erected every wall, laid every brick, commanded every bloom in the elaborate floral arrangements that graced every surface. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the exponential growth of Thorne Industries, a testament to innovation, hard work, and relentless dedication." She paused, allowing a ripple of applause to wash over her, soaking it in like a parched desert, but also the strength of family, the cornerstone of all success. My stomach clenched, a knot of familiar dread tightening within me. I knew what was coming. The subtle barbs. The veiled insults. The careful crafting of my perceived burden, designed to be heard and understood by the right ears in the room. Thorne wasn't one for direct confrontation, not in public. She preferred the slow, insidious poison of implication, the quiet, almost imperceptible erosion of one's spirit. I had witnessed it countless times before. "And speaking of family," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd before momentarily, almost imperceptibly, flicking towards my corner. A faint, triumphant smirk played on her lips, a tiny, almost invisible curve that only I would notice, a private shared understanding of the cruelty she was about to unleash. "We must acknowledge those who have supported us every step of the way. Those who have, in their own quiet way, contributed to the fabric of our lives." A collective murmur rippled through the guests, a vague sense of anticipation. I felt a tightening in my chest, a physical reaction to the emotional blow I knew was imminent. This was it. "My wonderful mother-in-law, Elara," Thorne purred, her voice dripping with an exaggerated sweetness that was more condescending than kind, each syllable coated in a saccharine layer that tasted bitter on my tongue. "She has been a fixture in our lives for many years. And as families grow, as responsibilities shift, we must always ensure the comfort and well-being of our elders." She paused, taking a deliberate sip of water from a crystal glass, drawing out the suspense, milking the moment for maximum impact. Lorien shifted beside her, his gaze now fixed on the floor, his jaw tight, his shoulders hunched almost imperceptibly. I watched him, my heart aching with a familiar, dull throb. He knew. He always knew, and he always let it happen. His silence was a betrayal, a complicity that cut deeper than Thorne's sharpest words. "It brings us immense joy, therefore," Thorne announced, her voice swelling with what she clearly intended to be perceived as magnanimity, a grand gesture of generosity, "to announce that we have secured a truly wonderful, state-of-the-art senior living community for Elara. It's called Golden Sunset Meadows, a magnificent facility, quite modern, with lovely gardens and activities galore. It's located a little further out, of course, a quiet, serene location, perfect for reflection and, well, for truly enjoying one's golden years without the hustle and bustle of city life or, shall we say, the demands of a busy family home." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly aimed dart, striking with chilling precision. State-of-the-art, magnificent, quiet, serene location, all euphemisms, I knew, for "we're sending you away, far from their lives, far from the grandchildren I adored. Without the hustle and bustle of city life or the demands of a busy family home," a not-so-subtle insinuation that I was a burden, a drain on their busy lives, an antiquated fixture that needed to be relocated. The further out part was a cruel touch, designed to isolate me, to sever the remaining threads that bound me to the life I knew, to the grandchildren I loved more than anything. Thorne had done her research. She knew exactly how to make it sound like a blessing while delivering the deepest cut, how to frame my banishment as an act of kindness. A few guests offered polite, hesitant applause, a scattered, uncomfortable sound that died quickly in the vast room. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances, their eyes darting between me and Thorne. I could feel their pity, their judgment, their quiet understanding of the subtle cruelty at play. My face, I knew, was devoid of emotion. I felt a strange calm descending, a quiet fury that was cold, not hot, a crystalline anger that solidified my resolve. The tremor in my hands had stopped. My heart, however, was roaring in my ears, a tumultuous drumbeat of betrayal and burgeoning power. "This decision," Thorne continued, oblivious to the undercurrents, basking in her perceived triumph, was made with the utmost consideration for Elara's needs. We believe it's time for her to truly relax, to be cared for, to enjoy her independence without any financial strain. After all, the demands of a large estate and a burgeoning business are quite significant, and we want to ensure Elara is truly comfortable, without having to worry about contributing anything herself. The final insult. Without having to worry about contributing anything herself. She was painting me as a financial drain, someone who had nothing to give, someone who was now being generously taken care of, a charity case. My son, Lorien, stood there, a silent, complicit statue beside her, his head bowed, his eyes remaining fixed on the floor, his jaw tight. He wouldn't meet my gaze, wouldn't offer a word of protest, wouldn't defend me. His silence was a scream, louder than any of Thorn's carefully chosen words. It was the sound of my son abandoning me, not just to a retirement home, but to Thorn's narrative, to her complete control, to a life of utter dismissal. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been quiet for decades, something that had endured a lifetime of self-effacement for the sake of peace, snapped. The patience I had cultivated, the endless well of understanding, the quiet endurance, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hard, crystalline resolve, a steely determination that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. And you think this was the first time? Oh, if only. If only that public humiliation had been an anomaly, a sudden, inexplicable act of cruelty. No, dear friend, that was merely the culmination, the final, excruciating polish on years of insidious, soul-crushing disrespect. Thorn didn't just wake up one day and decide to humiliate me. She built up to it, brick by painful brick, each interaction a calculated erosion of my spirit, with my son, Lorien, standing by, watching, often complicit in his silence. He was a witness to my slow demise, and his inaction was a constant, festering wound. When Lorien first introduced me to Thorn, almost 15 years ago, she was charming. Or at least, she seemed to be. Bright-eyed, ambitious, full of grand dreams that sparkled in her eyes. I was delighted that my son, who had always been a little too gentle for his own good, a touch too sensitive, had found someone so confident, so seemingly strong. My late husband, Marcus, had been the strong one, the visionary, the one who navigated the world with quiet power and unwavering conviction. Lorien had inherited my softer nature, my inclination towards empathy and peace. I suppose I hoped Thorn's strength would complement his, that she would be a guiding force. How naive I was, blinded by a mother's hope. The subtle changes began soon after they married. At first, it was small things, almost imperceptible shifts in the emotional landscape of our interactions. "Oh, Elara, are you really going to wear that to the charity gala? It's a bit rustic, isn't it?" she'd say, her smile never quite reaching her eyes, a faint wrinkle of distaste visible only to me. Or, "Mother, darling, your pot roast is lovely, a true classic, but Lorien simply adores my truffle-infused risotto now. He says it's so much more refined." Always delivered with that saccharine smile, a tone that implied concern or sophistication, but left a bitter sting, a quiet dismissal of my efforts, my tastes, my very being. I, ever the peacekeeper, ever the one to avoid conflict, would simply nod, offer a polite, strained smile, and try to find a polite way to change the subject, to diffuse the tension that always seemed to follow Thorn. I believed, foolishly, that if I was accommodating, if I bent, peace would prevail. Then, the requests started. Initially, they were framed as urgent pleas. "Elara, could you possibly watch the children this weekend? Our nanny is unavailable, and Lorien and I have a crucial networking event we simply cannot miss." Of course, I would. My grandchildren, Liam and Sophie, were the absolute light of my life, two bright stars in my sometimes dimming world. I adored them with a fierce, protective love. Their laughter was music to my ears, their small hands in mine a comfort beyond measure. But these favors quickly morphed into expectations. Soon, I was practically a full-time, unpaid babysitter, cook, and household manager for their busy lives. I'd arrive at their grand house, the very house I was soon to learn I owned, and find a meticulously typed list on the kitchen counter. Groceries to buy, organic only, specific brands, no substitutes, dry cleaning to pick up, Thorn's cashmere needs special care, Liam's soccer uniform needs mending, before Saturday's game, dinner for 8 by 7 p.m., Thorn's specific recipe, of course, from that French cookbook. And my son? He'd offer a quick, "Thanks, Mum, you're a lifesaver, truly," before disappearing into his office or out with Thorn, leaving me alone with the demands of their lives. He never questioned the lists, never suggested they hire someone, never once said, "Thorn, perhaps we're asking too much of my mother." His silence was a slow, agonizing abandonment. One particularly painful memory resurfaces with chilling clarity, a moment that encapsulates the quiet erosion of my self-worth. It was Liam's 5th birthday party. I had spent days baking and decorating a superhero cake, just like he'd asked for, a multi-tiered marvel with edible capes and tiny, sugary figures. I arrived, carrying the cake, my arms aching from its weight, my heart full of love and pride, only to be greeted by Thorn, who swept it away with a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Oh, Elara, how sweet. So quaint. But we already have a professional caterer for the desserts, darling. This can go in the kitchen for the staff, perhaps? They might enjoy it." She said it just loud enough for a few of her friends to overhear, casting me a look that perfectly conveyed both pity and condescension. My beautiful cake, a labor of love, a testament to my effort and affection, relegated to the staff kitchen as if it were an amateurish afterthought. Lorien saw the look on my face, the flush of shame that burned my cheeks, but he simply cleared his throat and ushered me towards a quiet corner, away from the festivities, away from the prying eyes. "It's fine, Mum," he'd whispered, his voice low, almost ashamed. "Thorn just wants everything to be perfect." Perfect for her image, I realized then, not for my feelings, not for the joy of his son. The financial aspect was the most insidious, a slow, silent drain that I, in my blind love, allowed. Thorn and Lorien's business, Thorn Industries, had started small, a seed of an idea that Lorien, bless him, had brought forth. He had good ideas, a keen mind for innovation, but he lacked the cutthroat ambition and the financial acumen, the ruthless drive, to truly grow it. Thorn, however, had the ambition in spades. She was always talking about funding rounds and expansion capital, often lamenting their limited resources, their struggle to get to the next level. And I, being the quiet, supportive mother, always found a way to help. I'd offer to pay for the children's private school tuition, explaining it as my contribution to their future, a way to ensure their opportunities. I'd quietly transfer funds when they talked about bridging loans for the business, framing it as a gift so they wouldn't feel beholden, so their pride would remain intact. They took it, of course, always with a grateful nod and a promise to pay me back when the business really takes off. "Mum, you'll see." The promises became less frequent, the gratitude more perfunctory, a quick, almost automatic response. I never pressed them. I loved my son, and I wanted to see him succeed, to see his dreams flourish, even if it meant my own quiet sacrifice. I truly believed they were working tirelessly, believing their own narrative of being self-made titans, rising through sheer grit and talent. I wanted to believe it too. Thorn began to openly belittle me, cloaking it in humor, in a false camaraderie. Elara, bless her heart, still thinks a spreadsheet is a bedsheet. "Isn't that just darling?" she'd quip at dinner parties, eliciting forced, uncomfortable laughter from guests who didn't know whether to pity or scorn me. Or, "Our dear Elara is a bit old-fashioned, aren't you, mother? Bless your cotton socks. She still uses a rotary phone." Lorien would sometimes offer a weak chuckle, a hollow sound, or just look down at his plate, meticulously arranging his food, his face a mask of discomfort. Never once, not a single time, did he tell her to stop. Never once did he stand up for me, to defend my honor, my intelligence, my very person. It was as if a part of him had slowly atrophied, replaced by a fear of Thorn's disapproval, a desperate need to maintain her approval, her love, her vision of their perfect life. He became a puppet, his strings held firmly in Thorn's manicured hands, dancing to her tune while I withered in the shadows. I started to feel invisible. My opinions were dismissed before I even finished articulating them, my presence tolerated rather than celebrated. I was the burden, the quaint old lady, who needed to be managed, to be placed in the corner. They spoke over me, about me, as if I weren't there, as if my ears couldn't hear the sharp edges of their words. My home, the small but comfortable house my late husband Marcus and I had built together, felt like a refuge, a quiet sanctuary from their grand, cold world, a place where I could breathe and simply be. I found myself retreating more and more, my visits becoming less frequent, my phone calls less hopeful, knowing they would likely go unanswered or be met with a rushed, dismissive tone. Each interaction was a fresh reminder of how far my son had drifted, how completely he had been consumed by Thorne's ambition and disdain. I would lie awake at night, the silence of my own home amplifying the ache in my chest, a dull, persistent throb of sorrow, wondering where I had gone wrong, how I had raised a son who could allow his mother to be treated with such casual cruelty. But even in those moments of despair, a flicker of something else remained, something that Marcus had instilled in me, a quiet strength I had forgotten I possessed, a deep-seated resilience that refused to be entirely extinguished. It was a tiny ember, but it held the promise of a raging fire. But they didn't know about the final secret my late husband left me. They didn't know that my quiet life, my simple clothes, my unassuming demeanor, were a carefully constructed facade. A facade that had allowed me to observe, to protect, and eventually, to act. My husband, Marcus, was a man of immense foresight and quiet power. He had built a small empire, not in grand, public ventures that shouted their success from the rooftops, but through shrewd, almost invisible investments, through patient, long-term strategies. He believed in stability, in long-term growth, and most importantly, in protecting his family from the unpredictable tides of life, from the capricious whims of the market and the darker nature of people. He often said, his voice soft but firm, "Alara, true power isn't in what you flaunt, but in what you quietly control. It's in the foundations, not the glittering spires." He saw my quiet nature not as weakness, but as a deep reservoir of strength. "You have a quiet strength," he'd often tell me, his eyes twinkling, "one they won't see coming. And one day, you might need it to protect Lorien, even from himself." When Marcus passed away, nearly 2 decades ago, he left me everything. Not just our comfortable home, but a meticulously organized portfolio of investments, legal documents, and shares in various companies, many under different holding names or trusts, designed for anonymity and maximum protection. He had always been concerned that Lorien, while good-hearted and intelligent, lacked the steeliness needed to navigate the shark-infested waters of high finance, the ruthlessness required to truly succeed in that world. "He's too easily swayed, too trusting," Marcus had once confided in me, a worried frown on his face. "He sees the best in people, which is a wonderful trait, but it makes him vulnerable." He had spent years subtly educating me, teaching me the intricacies of his hidden empire, not with grand lectures, but with quiet conversations over evening tea, patiently explaining complex financial structures. I had absorbed it all, a silent student of his foresight. One of his most significant investments had been in an obscure, then struggling, property development firm. He had acquired a substantial portion of its shares, almost a majority, through a shell corporation, a labyrinthine legal structure designed to obscure the true owner. And years later, when Thorne and Lorien were looking to establish their business, Thorne Industries, and acquire a headquarters, a grand estate that would reflect their burgeoning ambition, they stumbled upon that very firm's most prized asset, a magnificent, sprawling estate, perfect for their grand vision. They purchased it, or so they thought, with a hefty loan. What they didn't know was that the loan had been facilitated, quietly, through a subsidiary of the very firm I majority owned. The legal deeds to that estate, the very foundation of their success, were technically still under a holding company I controlled. I owned that house. The one they flaunted, the one they called theirs, the one where they held their extravagant parties and planned my banishment, was mine. It had been mine all along. And their burgeoning business, Thorne Industries? Marcus had also, years ago, quietly invested in a nascent tech startup that, unbeknownst to Thorne and Lorien, had eventually pivoted and merged with several other companies, one of which was the original core that became Thorne Industries. Through a complex series of anonymous trusts and strategic share purchases over the years, managed with the quiet expertise of Marcus's long-trusted solicitor, Mr. Davies, I had become the silent, majority shareholder. Every capital injection, every bridging loan, every significant financial boost they lauded as their breakthrough moment, their game changer, was, in fact, money I had funneled into the company from my accounts, through various intermediaries, making it appear as outside investment. I had been their secret benefactor, their uncredited financial puppet master from the very beginning. They were dancing on strings I held, believing they were soaring on their own wings, utterly unaware of the invisible hand guiding their every triumph. For years, this knowledge had been a quiet weight, a comfort, and sometimes, a burden. I had watched them spend lavishly, squander money on frivolous things, and take credit for what was, in essence, my late husband's enduring legacy and my careful stewardship. I rationalized it, telling myself it was for Lorien, for the grandchildren, for the continuation of Marcus's vision. I saw it as a protective measure, a safety net that would catch them if they ever stumbled. But as Thorne's cruelty escalated, as her words grew sharper, as Lorien's silence grew louder, the meaning of that secret power began to shift. It was no longer just a safety net, it was a sword, waiting to be drawn. The moment of decision, the absolute, undeniable turning point, was that public humiliation at the family announcement event. Thorne's words, without having to worry about contributing anything herself, coupled with Lorien's averted gaze, his slumped shoulders, were the final, irreparable crack in my resolve. It wasn't just about being sent away anymore, it was about being erased, dismissed, branded as a useless burden while she paraded her fabricated success, her stolen glory. My quiet strength, which had been dormant for so long, finally awakened fully, shedding the last vestiges of my self-effacing nature. I saw their entitlement, their profound ingratitude, their blatant disrespect, not just towards me, but towards the very foundation they stood upon, the very wealth they so arrogantly displayed. In that moment, a cold, clear thought formed in my mind: enough. It wasn't anger, not truly, though there was a bitter sting of betrayal. It was a profound sense of injustice, a quiet rage at the depth of their deception and my son's complicity, and a fierce determination to reclaim what was mine, not just the physical assets, but my dignity, my truth, my voice. I looked at Lorien, his head bowed, consumed by guilt he couldn't express, and I knew I had to do this, not just for myself, but perhaps, in a strange, painful way, for him too. To shake him awake from Thorne's enchantment, from the gilded cage she had built around him. To show him the true cost of his silence, the price of his inaction. Over the next few days, I moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. The trembling in my hands was gone, replaced by a steady resolve, a calm, unwavering certainty. I contacted Marcus's old, trusted solicitor, Mr. Davies, a man of impeccable integrity and discretion, who had known our family for decades and was privy to all of Marcus's elaborate financial structures. He listened patiently as I explained everything, from Thorne's escalating cruelty to Lorien's silence, his eyes widening slightly as I detailed Thorne's latest public humiliation. "It's time, Alara," he said, his voice grave, filled with a quiet understanding, "to unravel the threads. To show them the true tapestry you've woven." We spent hours meticulously reviewing the documents, the estate deeds, the intricate web of shareholdings, the anonymous investment contracts that linked my funds directly to Thorne Industries. We ensured every document was legally sound, every transfer meticulously recorded, every claim ironclad. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about revealing the truth, reclaiming ownership, and showing them the true architect of their downfall. The game was over. And I, the quiet, unassuming Alara, was about to lay all my cards on the table, to expose the truth that had been hidden for so long. And then, the day came. The day everything would be laid bare. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic outburst, not with me. My retaliation, like my life, was carefully planned, precise, and understated, yet utterly devastating in its impact. The family announcement event, where Thorne had publicly humiliated me, was still the talk of their social circle. The pitying glances, the whispers of "poor Alara," had reached my ears, carried on the wind of gossip, but they no longer stung. They fueled my resolve, giving me a quiet strength. Thorn had arranged a follow-up family dinner a week later, supposedly to discuss the exciting transition to Golden Sunset Meadows. It was designed, I knew, to be a final, quiet dismissal, a demonstration of their absolute control over my life. The guests were fewer this time, just Lorien, Thorn, and myself, along with Mr. Davies, my solicitor, whom I had insisted accompany me, much to Thorn's visible annoyance. She had tried to dismiss him, waving her hand dismissively, her voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, Alara, darling, there's no need for lawyers, this is a family matter. We're simply discussing your comfort." But I had simply met her gaze, a new, unyielding firmness in my eyes, and said, my voice calm but unshakable, "Indeed, Thorn. And it's time we discuss the entire family matter, with proper counsel present." Lorien had just looked at the floor, as usual, his face a canvas of muted anxiety. The dinner was served in their formal dining room, a cavernous space with a long, polished mahogany table that gleamed under the chandeliers, reflecting the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb, expensive wine, and Thorn's barely concealed impatience, her restless energy almost palpable. She kept glancing at her diamond-encrusted watch, clearly eager to get this unpleasantness over with, to send me on my way and return to her glittering life. "So, Mother," Thorn began, daintily dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, her posture radiating an air of studied nonchalance. "We've arranged for the movers next Tuesday. All your belongings will be carefully transported to Golden Sunset Meadows. It's truly a lovely place, you'll see. So many activities, new friends." Her tone was cloyingly sweet, a carefully constructed performance for Mr. Davies, who sat impassively beside me, his gaze steady and observant. I looked at her, then at Lorien, whose eyes were still fixed on his plate, meticulously cutting his lamb into tiny, uniform pieces, avoiding eye contact at all costs. I took a slow, deep breath, and a quiet, profound sense of power settled over me, a thrilling current that hummed beneath my skin. This was it. The culmination of years of quiet endurance. "Thank you, Thorn, for your arrangements," I began, my voice clear and steady, devoid of any tremor, any hint of the old Alara. "However, I'm afraid there's been a slight misunderstanding. I won't be moving to Golden Sunset Meadows." Thorn's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose, a faint frown creasing her brow. "Oh, Alara, now, don't be difficult. We've gone to a great deal of trouble to secure this for you. It's for your own good, really. You deserve to relax." Her voice was still sweet, but a thread of steel was beginning to show. "It's for your convenience, Thorn, not my good," I corrected her gently, but with a firmness that made her blink, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "And as for this house, and indeed, the very business you claim as Thorn Industries." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching their faces, the dawning comprehension slowly spreading across them. Lorien finally looked up, his eyes widening slightly, a flicker of apprehension crossing his features, like a dark cloud passing over the sun. I reached into my handbag, a simple leather clutch that Marcus had given me years ago, and pulled out a slim leather folder. "Mr. Davies, if you would be so kind." Mr. Davies, with a practiced grace that spoke of decades of legal battles, opened his briefcase and produced a series of neatly bound documents, crisp and official. He placed the first one on the table, sliding it towards Thorn with a deliberate movement. "Mrs. Thorn, Mr. Lorien," he began, his voice calm and professional, betraying no emotion, "my client, Mrs. Alara Harding, has asked me to clarify a few long-standing matters." Thorn picked up the first document, her brow furrowing in confusion, her perfectly manicured finger tracing the text. It was a deed. A property deed. "What is this, Alara? Some old paper?" "A joke?" she scoffed, but there was a hint of unease in her voice, a tremor beneath her bravado. Her eyes darted to mine, searching for answers, but found only calm resolve. "That, Thorn," I said, my voice cutting through her dismissive tone, sharp and clear, is the legal deed to this very estate. The one you are currently sitting in. And as you will see, the listed owner is Harding Estates LLC, a holding company entirely owned and controlled by myself, Elara Harding. The color drained from Thorne's face, leaving it ashen. Her eyes darted from the document to me, then to Lorien, a frantic, desperate look in them. What nonsense is this? We bought this house. Lorien, what is she talking about? She stammered, her voice rising in pitch, a high-pitched sound of disbelief. Lorien, pale and trembling, finally spoke, his voice a bewildered whisper, barely audible. Mum? What do you mean? I mean, Lorien, I replied, meeting his gaze directly, allowing him to see the pain, the disappointment, but also the strength, that the company you bought this house from, years ago, was merely a subsidiary of a larger entity. An entity that has, for years, been majority owned by your father's investments, now mine. You never truly owned this house. You merely rented it, indirectly, from me. Your father, in his wisdom, ensured its long-term protection. Before they could fully process that, before the shock could fully set in, Mr. Davies placed a second, thicker set of documents before them, a weighty stack that seemed to vibrate with unspoken truths. And these, Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Lorien, are the share certificates and legal documents pertaining to Thorne Industries. As you can see, Mrs. Harding holds a controlling, majority shareholding in the company, acquired through a series of anonymous investments and trusts over the past decade and a half. Thorne let out a gasp, a choked, strangled sound that ripped through the strained silence. She snatched the papers, her eyes scanning the names, the percentages, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the glossy pages, as if trying to tear the truth from them. This is impossible. We built this business. Every penny, every effort. This is fraud. This is a lie, she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering like fragile glass, revealing the raw, ugly fear beneath. No, Thorne, I said, my voice unwavering, betraying no triumph, only the quiet certainty of truth. It is the truth. Every capital injection, every angel investor, every bridging loan you so proudly announced over the years, came from me. From my late husband's legacy, managed and grown by me, a secret kept for your benefit and for the future of our family. I have been funding your lavish lifestyle, your ostentatious parties, your very existence, from the very beginning. You were not self-made. You were, quite simply, living off my generosity, believing it was your own ingenuity, your own hard work. The truth is, without me, there would be no Thorne Industries, no grand estate, no empire. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Thorne's ragged breathing, sharp gasps of disbelief and dawning horror. Her face was a mask of utter devastation, a canvas of disbelief, and a dawning, hideous realization of the true source of her supposed power. The vibrant sapphire gown now seemed to mock her, a symbol of the wealth she thought was hers, but which was merely on loan, a temporary costume. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were wide and unfocused, darting around the room as if searching for an escape, a hidden door, a way to rewind time. Lorien, however, was a different story. He sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking, a tremor running through his entire body. The initial shock had given way to a profound, gut-wrenching shame, a crushing weight of realization. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears, a raw, naked regret etched on his face, a silent plea for understanding. Mum, why? Why didn't you ever say anything? He choked out, his voice thick with emotion, barely a whisper. Because, my dear boy, I replied, my voice softer for him, but still firm, still resolute, I hoped you would see. I hoped you would remember who I was, what I had given, what true family meant beyond superficial wealth and status. I hoped you would stand up for me. But you never did. You watched as she systematically erased me, while I silently propped up your entire reality. This was never about money for me, Lorien. It was about respect. It was about your silence, your complicity. And about the truth. It was the only way for you to truly see. The guests, the unseen, ubiquitous audience of our lives, seemed to materialize in the air, watching, judging, their silent condemnation filling the room. The quiet, unassuming Alara, the one they pitied, had just pulled the rug out from under the feet of the arrogant, self-proclaimed titans of industry. The look on Thorne's face, the utter devastation of her carefully constructed world, was a sight I knew I would carry with me always. Her true financial puppet master had finally revealed herself. And the strings were about to be cut. So where is my daughter-in-law who called me the maid now, you ask? Where is the woman who orchestrated my public humiliation, who sought to banish me to a distant retirement home while flaunting her borrowed wealth? Thorne, the grand architect of Thorne Industries, the socialite of the lavish estate, now finds herself in a situation she would have once deemed impossible, a living embodiment of her own hubris. When Mr. Davies and I left that dining room, after Thorne's furious, desperate outbursts, her futile threats of lawsuits, and Lorien's broken apologies, the unraveling began swiftly and mercilessly. The very next day, a formal notice was served. As the majority shareholder, I initiated a complete restructuring of Thorne Industries. The company, which had been built on my capital and Thorne's vanity, could not survive without its financial backbone, which I promptly withdrew. The investments were pulled, the anonymous trusts dissolved, and the true ownership of the estate was legally solidified under my name, a process that was entirely within my rights and Marcus's meticulously laid plans. Thorne was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the mountain of debt she and Lorien had accumulated on credit that was backed by a company she didn't truly own. Thorne Industries collapsed, a spectacular implosion that sent shockwaves through their social circle, a scandal whispered about for months. The lavish estate, her prized possession, her symbol of success, was legally mine, and I put it on the market immediately. The servants, the expensive cars, the designer clothes, all disappeared like mist in the morning sun. Her social status, which she valued more than anything, evaporated faster than champagne bubbles. She tried to fight, of course, to sue, to claim fraud, to slander my name, but every document, every transaction, every carefully laid thread of Marcus's original plan, was meticulously legal and ironclad. She had no ground to stand on, no legal recourse. The woman who had so carefully constructed her image of success was exposed as a charlatan, a parasite, utterly dependent on the very person she had so gleefully belittled. I heard she eventually had to move into a small, rented apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, far from the gilded cages of her former life, forced to take a low-paying job to survive. The irony, I must admit, was not lost on me. It was a stark reminder of the true cost of her arrogance. And Lorien? My son. His fate is more complex, more heartbreaking, and still, in many ways, unfolding. The revelation shattered his world, not just financially, but emotionally. He saw the truth of Thorne's manipulation, the extent of his own weakness, and the magnitude of his silence. He tried to reconcile, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. He called me incessantly, came to my modest home, tears streaming down his face, recounting Thorne's true nature, her constant belittling of him, her psychological control. He finally saw what I had endured, what he had allowed, what he had become. But the years of silence, the countless times he stood by, the opportunities he had to defend me and didn't, had carved a chasm between us that even his belated remorse could not easily bridge. I loved him, I always will, with a mother's enduring, complicated love, but the trust, the easy warmth, had been irrevocably broken. I helped him get on his feet, quietly setting up a small trust for him, enough to give him a fresh start, far from Thorne's toxic influence, a chance to rebuild his life on his own terms. He eventually divorced Thorne, realizing the hollowness of their marriage, the emptiness of a relationship built on a lie. He now lives a simpler life, working a steady job that actually requires honest effort, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding his relationship with his children, Liam and Sophie, who were as confused and hurt by their parents' downfall as anyone. He's learning what true value is, without the false glitter of wealth, without the facade. We have a quiet understanding now, a fragile piece, a tentative rebuilding of our bond, but the scar of his complicity remains, a permanent reminder of the lessons learned. He knows he let me down, and I know I had to let him fall, however painful it was for both of us, for him to finally stand on his own. As for me, Alara, I have found a profound peace, a deep, resonant calm that permeates my days. I sold the grand estate, that symbol of their illusion, using the proceeds to establish a foundation in Marcus's name, funding quiet, meaningful projects in our community that truly help people, not just impress them. I still live in my small, comfortable home, but now it feels less like a refuge and more like a sanctuary of my own making, a testament to my resilience. I travel, I explore new places, I spend precious, unburdened time with my grandchildren, and I pursue the hobbies I had put aside for years, gardening, painting, reading the books I truly enjoy. My dignity is reclaimed, my voice heard, my power affirmed. The quiet, self-effacing woman is still here, but she is now stronger, clearer, and utterly unafraid. I learned that true strength isn't about being loud or domineering, but about knowing your worth, even when others try to diminish it, and having the courage to act when patience runs out. It is about understanding that sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them face the truth of their own actions. So, never test anyone's patience to its limits. Never assume the quiet ones are weak. Because the quietest people often hold the loudest truths, the deepest wisdom, and sometimes, the most devastating power. The game of life has many players, but only those who truly understand the rules, and who hold the true cards, get to write the final chapter. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness? Who have sacrificed their own dignity, their own worth, only to be dismissed and betrayed? I know my story is not unique. This channel is filled with the stories of resilient women, of life lessons learned the hard way, and of unexpected transformations. If my story resonated with you, if you found a piece of yourself in my journey, please consider subscribing. Turn on notifications so you don't miss another story of quiet strength and unexpected triumph. And most importantly, share your own thoughts and troubles in the comments below. Let us build a community where every voice is heard, and every lesson, no matter how painful, is acknowledged.